you were a co-author for a new report called Good Fathers, Flourishing Kids, The Importance of Fatherhood in Virginia, and a great roster of scholars that helped contribute to this. First, I kind of want to ask just your high-level takeaways. What are the main findings in that report that we need to be aware of?
Yes, well, it is exciting that Governor Youngkin in Virginia, asked a very diverse team of scholars from Brad Wilcox, Richard Reeves. We had perspectives from the gamut, from more progressive to more conservative. So I actually think it's a very strong report that shows, A, that this is an important issue, regardless of where you land on the political spectrum. And it's also good evidence that more and more governors are stepping back and seeing that if they really want to address a host of issues, education, poverty, crime, mental health, we have to have honest conversations, again, about young boys and men and young girls and women. So this is an example of that report. So some of the key findings, and again, some of these things are not, they're not rocket science in that they're kind of expected, but it's important that the kind of social science catches up to common sense, right? So among some of the findings, we found that boys and girls with involved dads, and in this particular data set, that generally meant having dinner at least 4 times per week with your kids. So that's generally what it meant. But so boys and girls with involved dads in the Commonwealth of Virginia, generally better grades, more A's and B's, less likely to have their parents contacted for disciplinary issues in school, and also very importantly from a mental health perspective, less likely to be depressed. So that kind of makes sense, right? If you're sitting down with your dad on a regular basis each week, hopefully what that means is you're not both on a digital device, completely disconnected from your current reality, but you're having human conversations. You're having human connection. There's someone that cares about you. So often we look for all these like complex policies and complex interventions, when sometimes just presence, engaged presence, makes a huge difference in the quality of life, both for the adult and the kid. So that was one, I think, very important finding, just better grades, less disciplinary issues at school, and less mental health issues, and particularly in terms of depression. There also was actually a pretty powerful, and this one I do think was surprising for some, and I think instructive, is that as related to academic performance, there was no racial divide between Black and white children who were raised in intact families. That's really important, right? So, because there's often this sense that the racial achievement gap is often caused by racial bias, whether it's teachers, schools, or racism in larger society. But our finding in Virginia is that kids raised in intact families, generally married two-parent households, no difference in terms of racial outcomes. So that's a very, very, very powerful finding, which for me, once again, underscores this idea. Let's talk a little bit more then about marriage formation or creating a new social norm around marriage as it used to be that marriage was considered what's called a cornerstone in your life, kind of a turning point, a big decision, as opposed to a capstone, meaning something that you might do at the end of your life. And this idea that the cornerstone, meaning that, finishing your education, getting work, getting married, then having children, was kind of the middle class script in our country. And I think these kinds of findings, which showed that there was no no difference in outcomes by race, particularly for kids raised in intact families, that says something about the importance of marriage.
Ian, it seems like the policy conversations we're used to having around these issues are more focused on survival of people, whereas your ideas seem to be about thriving. Do you see that as a distinction?
I do. I don't want our kids just to get by. You know? I run schools and I run schools particularly in low income communities with high crime rates, high non marital birth rates. But I run schools specifically in those communities because I want them to know that robust, fulfilling lives are within their grasp too, and that there are pathways to get there. And those pathways typically include things like getting a great education, some kind of full-time work. It usually means forming a strong family. I mean, one of the things we say is very important to our students is that it's not necessarily about the family that you're from. It's about the family that you're on the pathway to form. That can make a huge difference in your life. And these are the ingredients of human flourishing. And if you throw in there, by the way, a mix of religious faith, it can be a game changer. And so, yes, I want our students to thrive. I want young people across the country to know the ingredients of what a fulfilling life can be.
Ian, there's a section of that report from Virginia. I want to read this briefly and ask you to expand on it a little bit, because I think it helps to put a ribbon around, if you will, these findings of the importance of marriage, family formation, kind of the family stability aspect and their influence on young people, in particular men. And the section from your report is this: the challenges facing men are now a well-documented phenomenon. Increased deaths of despair, declines in college attendance, and high rates of male disengagement from full-time work are just 3 indicators of the problems that men face today. These challenges merit our concern not only because they hurt adult men, but also because they make life difficult for the women and children in the lives of men. That's because when men flounder, they are less likely to be the fathers and family men they could and should be. So I want to ask you to put that quote from the paper in context of what, and you kind of alluded to it, but when we're talking about issues facing men and boys and wanting to fix those issues, there's kind of a societal ripple effect that there's outsized benefits for everyone, as I understand it.
Yeah, I mean, what you just described, I think the last sentence was that those men are now less likely to become the fathers and the responsible human beings that we're wanting to. All that's saying is that's the cycle of disadvantage. That's the cycle of deprivation that occurs if we're the examples that are quoted in that, the suicide rate, the deaths of despair, all those things, almost all of those are the culmination. Those things don't just happen, right? That's what I mean when we seem to focus our attention on the sort of the most extreme examples when men are older. Well, what happened to those men across the first 10, 20, 30, 40 years of their lives, where they thought that alcohol, drugs, suicide were the only way to solve their problem? And so if we really want to break this cycle, again, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be trying to figure out how to help a 45-year-old man who's feeling disconnected, and there are things that we can do there for sure. But how do we shift those attitudes and behaviors early? It's one of the reasons we even have a campaign. One of the recommendations we make in the report is that there should be PSA campaigns. I used to work at MTV, in a former life, where I ran all of our pro-social programming around, getting young people to vote, to practice safe sex, to support preserving the environment. And I saw the power of really well done media messaging. And right now, for many young people, they're not seeing marriage, for example, as a necessary component of their own lives. And what if we were to have more campaigns, not waiting until the deaths of despair occur, But when young people are far more receptive to these kinds of messages, again, to stay off of this path of decision making, which right now is leading too many young men and then older men to fall into those statistics that you just mentioned.
Thanks for watching that clip of Defending Ideas. For the full conversation, click the link in the description and make sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your shows.